all of a sudden you would go from a winner to a loser because of these raggedy edges. And so we always want to be making sure that we've got clean edges, right? That we don't allow those raggedy edges to remain hidden because we think so well of ourselves. And we don't want to sit there and say, I'm an awesome trader. I don't actually want to go find out all the really stupid crap that I've done. But you do want to go find out the stupid crap that you've done. That's where all the money is.
Welcome to the Alpha Mind Podcast, the podcast for traders, hosted by Stephen Goldstein and Mark Randall. Today, our guest on the show is Annie Duke, a former world poker champion, one of the top female poker players in her time, and author of the outstanding book Thinking in Bets and her new book, How to Decide. Before we start, a quick word from our podcast partner, the Society of Technical Analysts, the STA. The STA are one of the world's leading bodies for the advancement of technical analysis and price action education. The STA deliver outstanding education programs, courses and diplomas and offer a suite of services for their members. If you are interested in participating in the Home Study course and the Home Study course plus diploma package, we are delighted to offer a £100 or local currency equivalent discount to listeners of the Alpha Mind podcast. To find out more about this, visit the Alpha Mind blog and go to the page links at the top of the page. Finally, a quick word about the Alpha Mind Trader Performance Coaching Program. This program is delivered to both professional traders in hedge funds, asset management firms, investment banks, and energy and commodity trading firms, and also to retail traders. It helps traders to improve how they work with risk and how they manage themselves through the risk process. Coaching helps traders to become more effective and more productive as risk takers and has led to outstanding performance improvements from traders across the world. Again, to find out more about this, visit the Alpha Mind blog and go to the page links at the top of the page, or also visit the website alpharcubed.com. That's the word alpha, the letter R, and the word cube.com to find out more about the coaching. Now, without further ado, on with this week's episode. Thank you very much again for agreeing to be on the podcast. I've been really excited about this. I'm a huge fan of yours.
Oh, thank you.
I've sold many of your books for you indirectly.
Thank you.
I work as I work as a coach.
Oh, yeah, great.
I work with traders and investment professionals, and at the start of every coaching program, I work with anyone. I say, I want you to go out and read Nassim Taleb's books, Annie Duke's books, Morgan Housel, and anyone you can, because you've got to get your head into probabilistic thinking.
Can I give you two others if you're not already recommending them? The Success Equation by Michael Mauboussin. Like really just like understanding how much luck and skill is in anything. It's so good. And then the other one I would recommend is Super Forecasting. So I would just add that, like if I were to think what would I hand to a trader, they're both really, really good. So the Success Equation is really just looking at like what's the distribution of skill to luck in different endeavors. And then also obviously kind of what are you supposed to do about it? But one of the central themes has to do with like as you reduce the skill differential in an activity, the appearance of luck starts to be greater. So like the way that I would put that simply is, if a professional football team is playing some peewee football team, then, obviously there's like no luck involved. But if, Arsenal is playing Liverpool, now there's lots of luck involved. And it's just because the skill differential between the two teams has now really narrowed, which so whatever little bit of luck is going to be a higher determinant of what the outcome is. It's actually conceptually incredibly important.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic, and I mean this is what I talk to people all the time when I'm working with them in their trading world. So just to give you a little bit of background, myself and Mark are both ex-financial markets. I was a trader for many years. Mark's been a trader and a broker for I think 40 years, Mark, or close to that. So we both lived in those worlds for many years and fought those battles. And I'm often telling people that this job is so often about luck and just trying to tip luck in your favour. And I often talk about poker. I love the world of poker, which is where you're from as well.
I just want to say that at some point during this podcast, we are going to have to talk about the Great British Baking Show. I'm just letting you know. But we'll mostly talk about decision making.
I think we can go straight to the Great British Bake Off.
Was it how to make a souffle is probably the most complex formula of all of the.
Yeah, well, there's some time. No, it's just it's. I will say that a very important part of good decision making is to find your zen and your meditative moments, and I happen to use that show because it's very meditative.
It
Um,
is, yeah.
yeah, if that were in America, like people would be sneakily throwing other people's souffles out and
Well,
backstabbing them. But
you know,
everybody's so cooperative on that show. It's quite nice
yeah.
to watch, and the setting is so serene.
Oh, having greenness in winter months is great, and I always get a sense of it tends to be sunny. It tends to
Yeah.
be really, really pleasant.
Well, except if it's
Yeah,
raining, it can really ruin their bake.
yes, a bit of humidity,
Yes.
not good. And you know that Mary Berry has just been made a dame as well in the Queen's New Year's
Oh, I'm so
honours.
happy. She's
Yeah,
so
so
great. She's so
yeah,
cute.
there you go. One of the great British people. Listen, to say, Annie, it's great to have you, and perhaps it's just worth hearing from you really on this incredible journey that you've had.
Oh gosh. Okay. Yeah. So I started off my life as an academic. I guess I'm what you would call a lapsed academic. Um, I did 5 years worth of PhD work at the University of Pennsylvania with the National Science Foundation Fellowship, and I was studying cognitive psychology. Specifically, I was studying how people learn. And then right at the end, when I was going to go out for my job talks to become a professor, I actually got sick. I'd been struggling with an illness and was trying to get my job talks done before kind of like addressing what was going on. But my body told me, no, we're going to tell you to do something else. And so I actually landed in hospital for a couple of weeks and ended up just, needing to take a year off in order just to recuperate. And it was during that year that I started playing poker. Honestly, totally out of a need for money. Um, I just needed money to live on. And it was something that I was kind of planning to do in the meantime. But I ended up loving it so much that the meantime turned into 18 years, and I played until 2012. And I think that what ended up happening was I'd been studying kind of a little bit more in theory these issues of how do we learn, how do we make decisions, how do we, in particular, I was thinking about how do you make these mappings between kind of what the underlying reality is given what the information that you're getting out in the world is. And obviously, that's a really huge problem in poker. You have to figure out what people's cards are. And then, having done that, you actually have to start to model who they are as a person so that you could understand how they might react to the cards that they're dealt. And it just seemed like a very kind of high stakes and real world instantiation of the kinds of things that I was studying as an academic, and I just loved it. Um, and then in 2012, which was like 8 years or so into my career, I got asked by an hedge fund actually to come speak to their options traders about how poker might inform the way that you might think about risk. And it was that talk where I really started to marry the work I've been doing in cognitive science and what I've been doing in poker in an explicit way, and thinking about the conversation that they could have with each other, really in order for the cognitive science to inform the things that I was doing in poker. And I did actually write a book that was mainly in that topic called Decide to Play Great Poker. Um, but then more in the reverse, obviously, as I was talking to traders and people in business and finance and even sales and marketing and HR, and really kind of crossing business about the way that poker as an environment and the where people's decisions are going wrong, what you can do to set that right, could really inform thinking in other environments away from the table. And that ended up really becoming mainly what I was doing for 10 years while I was also playing poker. And then 2012, I pivoted out, started focusing almost completely on the consulting, and then obviously wrote these two books. So that's how I got here.
The interesting thing is that this is a growing area, but still relatively untapped, I find.
Yeah, I think that I think that for a long time, economics in particular, and the way that people were thinking about that, were thinking that it was a solvable space. In other words, I, I think that a lot of the approaches were making assumptions about what information was known, uh, and that those were very strong. I mean, in a lot of ways, I think they were asking the question: if you had perfect information and the people in the market were perfectly rational, what would the appropriate answer be? And then obviously kind of starting with Kahneman and Tversky and Dick Thaler, people started saying, but hold on a second, like maybe people aren't so rational and we need to be thinking about that. And then alongside that, where people were really looking at just human cognition and sort of the biases and heuristic space, and now Kahneman obviously is very, very focused on noise as well, which is just the inconsistencies in your own judgments. You also had a lot of people who were coming in and really talking about the uncertainty, right? How does uncertainty that's really coming from two places, just luck, but then also the really big thing, which is this hidden information that the judgments that we're making are really subjective, because we're partially behind the veil of ignorance, like no matter what we're deciding. And that's kind of where Phil Tetlock starts to come in. He starts to think like, how do you navigate those environments in order to improve your judgments when there's so little that's known and the world is really, really probabilistic. And, how can you improve human performance under those circumstances? And, it's been building up a lot of steam. Obviously, I think the last decade in particular has been just a real boon for getting that kind of information out into the world.
And you've just released a new book, which it came out this week.
And it did this week.
Myself and Mark were lucky enough to get an advanced version of it.
Oh, now I'm on the edge of my seat because I really haven't gotten a lot of feedback.
Well, to be honest, I've read half of it. I'm going to be honest, I haven't read the whole thing, but just about every moment I've had, when I've had a bit of time, I've had a chance to look at it, and I'm absolutely awed by it. It's, I read, let's be honest, I listened and I read Thinking in Bets. Was that your voice on Thinking in Bets, by the way?
It was my voice, although a slightly raspier version of my voice, because I was just getting over laryngitis.
Oh, right, okay. And yeah. I mean, it was one of those books where I just had to keep rewinding the Audible tape and making notes in it when I read it. And I just thought it was brilliant, and, wow, someone gets it. And there's some great stories in there as well. So I was wondering how you're going to approach how to decide, because it's a different approach. And it feels, I'm amazed the way you've done it, because I was thinking, is it going to be the same story rewritten? But it's definitely not. It's a progression.
Well, that's definitely what I was trying. Yeah.
And I was, there's an exercise element to it. So you put a lot of exercises in it all the time that really make you think and really challenge you as you go through it. And I love that element of it as well. And I've got to learn about the weights of bisons as I've done it.
Right. I do. Actually, I just talked to somebody about that this morning. I have an exercise in there where you have to guess the weight of a bison from a picture. That's not just for fun. It's not to win a prize in a lottery, but it's actually meant to show the power of guessing, but which we can talk about in a second. But I'm so happy to hear you say, like, sort of your feeling of how it relates to Thinking in Bets, because really what I was trying to do was kind of twofold. I was trying to write a book that somebody could read who had actually never read Thinking in Bets. And that was really, really important to me to do that, because I think that, most people they can't really describe what a good decision process looks like. And given that, if you think about sort of what's the quality of your life going to end up being, there's really only two influences on that, right? Luck, well, I can't do anything about that. I didn't choose my parents. And then there's this other piece, which is your decision making. And so this is the thing that you can actually do something about. It actually has a very dramatic effect over time on, how your life turns out. And yet most people can't actually describe, like, well, what would a good decision process be? What are the things that I need to be doing in order to be a better decision maker? And this is true, by the way, not just of like your average person. This is true when I'm coming in and I'm talking to CEOs and I'm looking at what their processes are. And, they're just kind of like all over the map. And so I really wanted to offer something to people to help them ground decision-making in really good process with a really good set of tools. But I obviously also wanted to write that for people who had read Thinking in Bets as well. So now I kind of had a twofold mission, right? I don't want to confuse people who haven't read Thinking in Bets, and I don't want to bore people who have. So I had to sort of walk that line a little bit. And so what I feel like is that in doing so, and in kind of trying to ground this in such practical advice, that I ended up exploring kind of a different part of the puzzle than I did in thinking in bets. So in thinking in bets, I think I'm talking mostly about luck. So there's all this luck. I talk, about this issue of hidden information for sure, but I'm really focused on luck and the way that luck ends up uh, separating the quality of your decisions from the quality of the outcome. Because obviously, when you make a decision, you've just said, here are the set of possibilities that could occur. And then luck is determining which one you see. And so those backward looks that we do where we end up resulting are quite bad. And so I had a lot of focus on luck. But the thing about luck, if you're trying to give somebody practical advice about how to make their decisions better, is that you can't do anything about luck. It's by definition something that we don't control. It's a force that acts upon us. What we can actually do, which Mark alluded to before, is deal with this hidden information part. What is informing the decisions we make? Because that's the way we figure out, am I making a decision that's going to be 60-40 in my direction or 40-60 against me? And if that, I don't want to do that second thing, because that's going to change the probability that I experience kind of what we would colloquially call good fortune or bad fortune, or good luck or bad luck. And so what you really need to do is focus on that information piece so that you're choosing options which toggle the luck in your favor, right? So it's not that you can control luck, it's that you can change what the distribution of possible outcomes are. And so I feel, that in this book, that's where I spend almost the whole book, is just on this informational piece. How do you create a process that's going to improve the quality of the information that's informing the decisions that you have? And that's why I think it's as you said, it's like a complement to that book, as opposed to a reiteration of that book.
Right. Well, I didn't actually read Thinking in Bets, but I did read this new book of yours.
You're the audience, the other audience that I talked about. I like it. I've got both audiences here. This is fantastic.
You need to be honest, right? But I did like the fact that you were sharing process. We talk often in this series of podcasts that it's the lack of process that's often the downfall of the trader that loses everything. And actually having some sort of guide and framework that you can apply to your own information flow and decide what these questions are within that information base is important. But I think you're absolutely right in terms of the sources of that information and actually your awareness of the world that you're trying to decide which way is going to be the best decision. And certainly it's something that I train is the extraordinary awareness we can have as a capability of almost executional excellence driven by this breadth of awareness. But often we're not plugged into that. The more we're frustrated by our lack of performance, the less our awareness becomes. And so actually we need to almost rewind that, and actually the bigger our awareness can be and gives us a better choice as to what quality of information we want to home in on, and that then drives the process that then drives decisions. So yeah, I think it's attention and awareness is critical in my view.
I think it's that, and being very, just being very process driven, having a deliberate process about how you're thinking about what are the ways in which I'm exploring that information space. Because the issue is that when left to our own devices, we are exploring that space really in a way that is meant to certify the beliefs that we already have. So generally if we're sort of left to our own devices, and we know this from like a lot of the cognitive bias literature, that we interact with this sort of information space in a way that's just going to prove that the things we already believe are true. And we can kind of think about that in two ways. There's like our models, right? So if we have a particular investment strategy, like let's say your growth or value, as an example, which are different ways to model, what the market is, right? What's the strategy that you're supposed to be using in order to generate alpha in the market? And you hold those views very strongly. Then as you come across new information, you're very likely to interpret that information to fit your model. Why can we do that? Well, because, of what I talked about before. First of all, there's a little bit of luck where if things don't go your way, you can just say, well, that was just luck. My model was right, but I just got bad luck. That's one way that we can reason about information in that way. But the other is that data isn't truth, right? So you can look at this data, and particularly smart people can really model that. You can fit it to your model pretty easily. And I'm not saying that we do this in any kind of way that's meant to manipulate anybody. It's actually just to sort of protect this thing that we very strongly believe. So that's one way that we can be reasoning about information to fit the beliefs that we already have. But the other one is a little bit more meta, which basically just goes like this. We have an identity, and there's all sorts of things that are woven into our identity. Like, I want to believe that I'm a good decision maker. I want to believe that the things that I believe are true. Because when I think about what is my identity, it's really just my beliefs, right? My beliefs are forming the fabric of my identity. And so I really just don't want that to be torn. I don't want you to tear that asunder. Now, obviously, if you could take a step back from that for a second and say, look, if there's some piece of information that comes along that contradicts the things that you believe, and I could tell you for sure that information was true, so therefore you should change your belief. In theory, you would say, well, of course I would want to do that, because my beliefs are going to inform all of my future decisions. And if I hold on to this belief that's inaccurate, it's going to reduce the quality of my decisions going forward. So obviously, if you showed me that information, I would change my mind about it. But one need only look at Twitter for about a half a second in order to understand that that's not what actually people do. When you're confronted in the moment with the information that might contradict the thing that you believe, you completely forget about your future self. You completely forget about all those future decisions that you might make that would benefit from actually thinking about that information in a new way. And you just reject it, or you interpret it in a way that supports the belief that you have, even if it actually doesn't. And so this is really the problem. That's what's happening when we're left to our own devices. So if you don't have a good decision process, and you haven't figure out a way to put good guardrails around that particular problem, then it doesn't matter whether you're building out decision trees, which I show people how to do, right? You can build out decision trees, you can make probabilistic, you can do all of that stuff. But if it's informed by junk, then it doesn't matter. So it's not just that you need to understand how do I actually build out a decision tree and put probabilities on it and those things that are really important, but you got to make sure your beliefs are in order, and that's the thing we're so bad at.
That's a fascinating point, because I talk about this often with people. Where do your beliefs come from? And there's this huge thing, and we use the term ego, and I think it's probably the best word to describe it. This ego we have, where we become attached to our beliefs, we become attached to what we've learned early in our career, and we become so attached to them that we hold them like a comfort blanket.
Mm-hmm.
They get us through the night, which is really the uncertainty of the world.
That's such a great way to put it. Like, what a wonderful metaphor.
Yeah. Well, I go back to my coaching. So I was a trader for 25 years, and then I started working as a coach. And a lot of what you said reminded me of an individual. And Mark's probably thinking, I know where Steve's going with this. I talk about this individual so often, both in my coaching and on these podcasts, because he was an exceptional trader. And I was working with him. He worked for an investment bank in Asia, US investment bank, and I was introduced to him as the best trader we have in the entire firm. And my first question was, why is he having the coaching then? And they said, well, he just wants to get better, which is kind of, well, that's great to hear. That's what I like to hear. The best people have coaching usually, and the people who struggle are the least likely to ask for it. And I got to know this individual, and I started working with him. And I often tell people that as he came into the room for the first session, it was almost like this guy had no ego. I'd never met an individual like this. He did have an ego, obviously, we all have an ego, but he presented himself as almost egoless. And immediately as I started talking about trading, he started talking about poker. And everything that we talked about in trading, he related back to poker. And then it turned out that he started telling me that he used to go across to Macau every weekend and play tournaments.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, now I see your eyes raising. And then I found out that he was actually ranked in the world's top 200 poker players at the time, whilst being a full-time investment bank trader. He's now a hedge fund trader, as you can imagine. But that's when I really realised that this guy had a complete poker mindset. And everything he talked about in terms of risk and trading and probability was laced in those terms. And it was his ego to me that was the real thing. Because what he'd kind of done was lost all these attachments to his personality, his need to be right, his fear of uncertainty. He did not have them. He did not have an ego, but he'd managed to turn them down to such an extent that his decision making was so brilliant. And he wouldn't take decisions just on whether the market was going up or down, but whether it was a good value risk to take or not. And that was what really made him such a champion, both as a trader and as a poker player. And as I got to know him, I asked him, what makes you such a, you play with, big tournament players regularly. They're all smart guys. They all know the value of a hand and the rule, how to win a game, and they've all probably using similar variations on the same strategies. So what makes you so much better than them? And he said, I walk away better than anyone else, which I didn't expect. And I said to him, well, what does that mean? And it means, well, I can walk away from a hand better than most of the other guys there. I walk away from a bad night or a bad run of cards better than anyone else. And what he meant by that was he doesn't go into a tilt state. He keeps his mind on the process. He looks at what's in front of him and he plays the hand that's in front of him, not his frustration from the previous set of hands. And he said to me, it doesn't always work. Sometimes I do lose it, was his word. He said it's impossible to be like that. But just hearing him talk about that as a decision maker.
Yeah, I think that's part of the reason why I think that poker is such a good model, because obviously, most poker players actually fail to do exactly what he did. They get very attached and they start to, one of the most common things, I mean, this is in the simplest way of talking about how are you interpreting information to update your beliefs. One of the most common patterns that you see with poker players is when they win, it's like they're amazing and their opponents are idiots. And when they lose, their opponents are still idiots somehow. It's just bad luck. So that's just being attached to, how am I thinking about this information to protect my self-image? Because I don't want to be the one who thinks that I made a mistake on a hand. But of course, it's necessary to discover that in order to become better. And you can kind of take that idea like across poker, like when I'm thinking about the way that I might imagine you as a player, I need to hold that in the moment that I make the decision. Like whether I decide that I'm going to raise you or not, I have to have high conviction about my current model of you as a player, that this is the best choice. But then, literally, the next thing you do, I need to loosen up my confidence in that model, because I have to allow myself to incorporate your future actions into my model, and that's for two reasons. One is I might just have you wrong, and if I'm not paying attention to the information, then I'm going to keep this model of who you are as a player, and I'm not going to change it. And then the other is that you might get better, or by the way, you might get worse, and I need to notice changes in the way that you play. So, because maybe one day, maybe you were losing for 2 years and you were terrible, and one day you decided you were tired of it and you actually decided to go get yourself like a coach, and you come to the table, and if I'm not noticing that, then I'm going to be in really big trouble. I think that's something that I was actually more sensitive to than other people, because what I found was that being a woman, which obviously in poker is quite unusual, people had much more strongly held views about how I played. And they just wouldn't notice that I was doing something different than the things that they believed of me. They just didn't kind of notice it. And I think that that's a little bit because there was a little bit more of an emotional investment in, I don't know, being beaten by a girl or something at the table, just that kind of stuff. Because, when I started off, I was playing in Montana with basically a bunch of cowboys, and I was in my early 20s, and I was the only girl at the table. I can tell you that much. I was the only woman at the table. And they just had really strongly held views about women, and so I think that I was always a little bit more sensitive to, let me try to think about, I need to have this model of this person, and I need to have confidence in my opinion at the moment that I make a decision. I don't want to second guess myself in the moment. But then as soon as I'm done, I'm like, all right, I'm going to be a good Bayesian now, and I'm going to update my beliefs going forward. So it's not second, it wouldn't be second, you wouldn't describe that as second guessing afterwards. You would describe that as proper belief updating. And I would say, just like your client, I was terrible at it, but I feel like I was better than other people. And you know what? That's what it's all about. These things are very deeply embedded in our operating systems. It's just kind of the ways that our mind works. But that's kind of the point of this book. It's like, if you can be better at it, those improvements will accrue over time. If you can be slightly better, if you're in a market and you're trading in a market and you're a little bit better than the other people who are trading, you can keep control of your emotions a little bit better. You can keep your eye on your future self. You can figure out a way to interact with information in more of an objective way than they can. As unobjective as it will be, it'll be more objective than other people, and that makes all the difference, because those small differences accrue over time, and it ends up being a really big deal.
We'll return to the podcast in a minute. Just a quick thank you to the Society of Technical Analysts, the STA, who have partnered with us on this podcast. The STA offer outstanding services to their members, including education programs, courses, regular newsletters, a monthly webinar, as well as research and other articles on the topic and themes related to price action. We are also delighted to be able to offer AlphaMind podcast listeners a special £100 or local currency equivalent discount on their outstanding home study course. To find out more about this, visit the AlphaMind blog page and go to the links at the top of their blog. Now back to the podcast.
I think it's incredibly important. Actually, I did a webinar for bare ball traders, who are a trading community on the East Coast, but they're global, a few weeks back. And at the end of the webinar, my webinar was about the worst trades I'd ever seen as a broker, and of which there are a few. Some were hilarious. I think it showed you how funny people can fail.
How about all the trading that just happened with Hertz? That's got to get into your presentation now.
That'll get in. And someone asked a question at the end, which was, well, tell us about the best trade you've seen, because of course, people listen to this community. Think about, great trading is making money. Actually, great trading is the trade you didn't do that would have lost you a fortune because you decided that it was a no trade rather than a trade. Great trading is actually taking that small loss because you perceived it as about to walk off of the cliff, and the market walked off, and you were happy to take that loss. And I think that all comes back to this awareness and this non-judgmental approach of being able to let go and not, not owning something so strongly that you just have to, that's my only trade is this, and it's definitely. There are times when actually the best decision is to get rid of it. And I think that's a skill that needs to be learned, and it comes from process.
Yeah. So obviously in poker, that would be folding or quitting the game. Generally, in game theory, we call it loss cutting. We know that people are very bad at that. In fact, there was some interesting research by Alex Imus, I think, who showed that when he was looking at like the best traders on their buy decisions, they had like 60 bips in alpha they were generating. They were way better than random. But on their sell decisions, they were pretty close to random. In fact, I can't remember if they might have been slightly worse than random, but they were not generating an alpha on their sell decisions. And so he was trying to figure out why. And what he looked at was, so at the end of the day, they wanted to end up with a positive balance. So essentially, if they knew that they were taking a loss, they would just kind of sell a winner to try to balance it out, to make sure that their balance was good at their P&L at the end of the day, which doesn't matter. ended up positive. And so what ended up happening was they were really good at buying the stuff, but they made terrible decisions about selling it because the selling had to do with their own ego, right? Like, what does my P&L look like at the end of the day? As opposed to like, should I actually sell this or not? Should I get off this position or not? And you see that a lot with poker players as well, where and this would just sort of generally go under like this prospect theory or loss aversion, that Kahneman and Tversky did, where if players are winning in a game, and you say, "Hey, do you want to go to dinner?" They're like, "Dealer, deal me out." Cashier, cash me out. But when they're losing, it's like, this game is so good and I can't leave, and so on and so forth, because you don't want to turn, it's like you just never want to turn those paper losses into realized losses. And you really, really are super eager to turn the paper gains into realized gains, right? So sometimes we like paper marks and sometimes we don't. And it's not symmetrical when we like to have those paper marks or not, right? When do we want to close those positions out? And I think that this is one of the big skills that people need to focus on is starting to just get more rational about, just sort of viewing, like, it shouldn't matter if I'm winning or losing in a game. It should matter what I believe my edge is in the game. And that's going to have things to do with who are the other players that I'm playing against, but also what is my own state. So, it's not, as you've said with your client, it's not just that I need to figure out to be able to fold this hand. It's that I need to figure out when I'm not in a good state to be playing, and that I need to leave because I am going on tilt. I can't let go. I can see that I've accumulated some losses here. I've just, because look, no matter how superhuman you are, if you lose 4 18%ers in a row, you're just not in a good state of mind. I can let go of the first one. I can let go of the second one. The third or fourth one, fifth one starts to roll around and you're just like, what is, and it's just really hard. And you need to know that it doesn't matter whether I'm winning or losing in the game. If I feel that thing that I can't let go, I've got to leave. The other thing is, if I feel like I'm tired, it doesn't matter whether I'm winning or losing in the game, I've got to get up. If I'm sick, I need to get up. And to start to make your decisions really just about edge, as opposed to all of these things that I would just sort of call externalities, right? Like these things that don't really have anything to do with what that decision should actually be.
Now, the strength of your cognitive self has got to be the number one thing you need to get right before you walk into any game of such complexity.
Right, and that strength is relative,
Yeah,
right? So
absolutely.
we need to realize that that's not an absolute judgment. That's a relative judgment. If I'm tired and not feeling my best, and I'm playing against very low limit players, that's fine. I'm going to do just fine against them. But if I'm tired and not feeling so well, and I'm playing against elite players, I have no business being there. I mean, by the way, I wouldn't have any business being there today because it's been too long since I played. They would eat my lunch. But back when I was in form.
So I've got a question for you. We've talked about relatively complex process before a decision gets made. And I know that some traders are going to be thinking, well, okay, it's going crazy out there. Things are super, super busy. I've got a position on, and I haven't got time to go through these various tools. But you must have some slightly lighter guidance for those sort of people that want to make a really, really quick decision.
Oh, yeah. So basically, the way that you can think about, how fast or slow can I go? And this is going to have a little bit to do with, you have to do some thinking ahead, is that assuming that the trade is going to have an impact, I'm going to assume the trade's having an impact on your P&L, right? Like, otherwise it would be a pretty small trade, but whatever. Essentially, this is what you can do in order to speed yourself up. There's two things you can do. One is you can straight up just think about essentially liquidity. So the more liquid, the more easy it is for me to get off the position, the faster that I can get into the position. And the reason is that then when there are signals in the future that tell me that maybe, it wasn't as good as I thought it was, then you can immediately get off because information will reveal itself afterwards. And so then you don't need to collect so much information and get yourself into a state where you have a lot more as high confidence or where the trade is going to be as accurate because you can get off that position. That requires, though, in relation to the discussion we just had, that when you do that some of that saved time has to be spent saying, but these are the conditions under which I'll sell. because otherwise you may get caught up in this sunk cost problem and all the things that we just talk about. So just make sure that you're identifying that. Now I want to be really, really clear that you can get off a position not just by selling, because you can certainly hedge it. So positions that have an easy hedge available, so that even if it's hard for me to sell that position, I can get on a position that's going to be negatively correlated with it, or I can build some position that would be negatively correlated with it across a couple of different trades. Then that's fine too, because that's a way to get off of it. And then the other thing, obviously, that's just a very easy thing, is that if you get rid of the autocorrelation in the trades that you're making, you can obviously go faster, right? Because then you have a whole bunch of different positions on, they aren't correlated with each other, and that's obviously reducing your risk. So when we combine all of that, we can go fast. But the other thing you can do is, if there is like some really big trade that you're thinking that you want to put on, it's really good to do what's called decision stacking, which is to figure out what are these small positions that I can get on, that I'll be paying attention to them, where they're actually going to really help me test my model. And in particular, how people will generally approach that problem is they'll say, I have some theory, I have a thesis, and so I'm going to do some small trades that would work if my thesis is true. That's not that helpful. What you want to do is think, what are the trades that I can do where if they work, my thesis is wrong? That's actually the more helpful thing to do. So, and that's called decision stacking, which is, let me do some small stuff that's actually going to be really high information. But if I lose, it doesn't matter because I didn't have a big position on, but it's just causing me to track it, right? So it's just a tracking mechanism. You could have an anti-portfolio if you want to do this, but I actually think it's better to put the position on. I think you tend to pay more attention to it. So essentially you can say, let me put on a few trades, some that if my thesis is correct, they'll win, but also a whole bunch where I can think of what are all the ways that my thesis might be wrong? Because there's going to be more than one. What are all the trades that would work if my thesis were wrong? And then just put some small positions there. And then that's actually going to allow you to build a model out that when you are putting a bigger position on, you're going to actually just have a better model. And by the way, it's pretty simple. It's like, this is just renting before you buy.
Yeah, but
Literally.
This is fascinating because it plays into something I used to do in my trading career, which kind of happened around about the halfway mark in my career, and sort of coincide with the start of a big performance improvement for me. And it was, I used to get caught in that trap of trying to prove my ideas. So this is exactly what I'm hearing you talk about. I've got a great idea, great thesis. I want to prove it's right. So I would get into the confirmation bias. I would find people that say the same idea. I would find analysts who I knew were in favour of that idea, and then I'd sort of, they agree with me, so that must be good. And then what I changed was to start trying to disprove my idea. So I had a thesis, and whether it was based off a fundamental analysis or a technical analysis, or whatever was the underlying data analysis factor behind it, I then tried to smash it apart. And I try and find people who disagreed with me, who were contradictory, and talk it through with them. And suddenly, a lot of them did get smashed apart. But the ones that still stacked up and were still good, then I'm sitting there with usually a great risk reward trade as well. And
because part of the problem is like, they're like, if you take an individual position, it could win, and there could be lots and lots and lots of different explanations. Like, we know that because that's why data mining is possible. If there were only one explanation for why something happened in the world, you wouldn't be able to go and data mine as well, right? So we know that there can be multiple reasons that something does well. Now, one of those reasons may be your thesis, right? That your thesis is correct, and that's actually the underlying driver of the value there. But there's all sorts of other reasons that it might win as well. Some of them being like randomness, right? Like, it could just be totally random. So going to try to prove your hypothesis is not actually going to be particularly helpful, because you could actually land on some things that are winning, but they could be winning for totally different reasons. And we know what happens is that those things tend to blow up, right? Because if you don't have the underlying right, then you could have just some set of things that did well, and then you think you're right, and then you're trading on that. And then we get into that problem of, as new information that comes in that would disprove your hypothesis, you've now got such a deep trench dug because because your hypothesis is very, it's now part of your identity. And boom, we get into this reasoning problem. If instead you say, where's the valuable information? The valuable information is to say, what are the other explanations, first of all, for why this thing might do well? And then what are the things that my model wouldn't predict that would do well? So you could think about that. And then what are the things that if they did well or if they lost would totally disprove, would really make me rethink what I'm thinking. Now that does two things for you. One is that you're more likely to find the truth, which is helpful. The other is that it literally makes you somebody who's walking the walk of, I don't hold my models very tightly. I don't think about them as part of me. I don't think about them as my possessions, right? This is something that I'm using in the moment to make decisions, but it's always up for revision, and that's totally fine. And then what happens is that you're just more likely to be viewing the information that comes in a more objective way. And it's a really good way to kind of discipline the bias, is to be asking the right question, not why am I right, but why am I wrong? And if I can figure out why I would be wrong, then I could go test that. And then that's actually going to end up making me more right in the long run.
Absolutely. And I'm very mindful of the time, and that we want to try and sort of, in the next 10 minutes, maybe bring this sort of conversation to a close. But it was something I really wanted to talk about, and it's going back to your new book, How to Decide, which it's only just come out this week. And I was fascinated. There was something that fascinated me about it. And it's that it's not just a book that is giving information and explaining theories and ideas, but it's actually a book for learning and stretching yourself and trying things out. It's got an exercise component to it, which is really rare. It's one of the things that I think is a real strength of it. And I'm, myself and Mark as well, we're both in this space of trying to help people become better. We're both coaches, we're both performance consultants. Part of the philosophy behind Alpha Mind 101 is to be an educational service, a service that people can listen to, learn from and grow with. And for me, one of the missing things that is out there with so much in this behavioural world is it's interesting and informative, but you can't learn and grow from it. And that's one of the things I love about How to Decide. And it's one of the things why I advocate keeping journals, decision-making journals. I call them the gym workout of the trading room, in a sense that they're not sexy, people don't like doing them, they start them and then they forget them 3 months or 3 weeks later, and they stop doing them. And they take time and effort. And if you want a beautiful body, you've got to put that time and effort in the gym. And most people want that, but they don't want to put the effort in. So your book kind of pushed people in that direction. But what else can people do in that sense to start becoming better decision makers, better thinkers in these fields?
Oh gosh, there was so much in what you said. I feel like I should carry you around as an advertisement for my book. So look, the reason why there's so much practical stuff in this book is because the one thing that I know, well, first of all, I felt the same thing you did, that even with Thinking in Bats, these are, I like my ideas, and I like the ideas in other books in this space, but how you would actually do something about it, I thought was a little bit missing. And I just felt like somebody should try, and so I will. I'm gonna try to give a book that's actually going to tell you in a practical sense what are the ways that you could actually get better at decision making. I'm gonna then I just want to say something about the decision journal. I think part of the problem with a decision journal is that people feel like it creates extra work, and hopefully what's coming across in How to Decide is that you don't need to create a good decision journal, because making a good decision requires that you actually have to create a record, you have to write stuff down. So I don't think of I actually wouldn't recommend to somebody that they do a decision journal for exactly the things that you're talking about. It feels like an extra step. And instead, what I really advocate is that a good decision process creates that record. It creates a record of what you were thinking at the time. It creates the record of how what you thought the different possibilities were for what your options, how the options you were considering might unfold. It creates a record of what you think your goals are and what your values are and what your resources are, how probable things are to occur, what the upside and downside are, what the risk is. It all ends up as a record. Like, because I don't think you can make a good decision without actually taking out a piece of paper and actually trying to do this stuff, because otherwise you get into this weird place of like sort of gut and intuition, and we all sort of like that because it feels so special to us. And then all of a sudden, the problem is that you can't go back and Google your decision making. So it's going to hurt your decision making in the moment, because it's going to not allow you to see those, to stress test the ideas, to say, does this really make sense? Right? How can I think about the ways that this might be wrong? All of this stuff, which should be naturally be written down as part of the process and not an after the fact reconstruction. But also, it doesn't give you a way to be able to go back and look and say, what was informing my decision at the time? Now that I see how the world has unfolded, let me go back and look and say, why was I thinking what I did? Because it turns out that we're really bad at remembering that if we don't have a written record of it. And if we can't remember our experience, how could we possibly learn from it? And hindsight bias really messes with that. Resulting really messes with that. There's something called memory creep that I talk about, where, what we knew after the fact all of a sudden creeps into our memory of what we knew before the fact, as an example, this happens all the time, by the way, with winning trades, right? It's like you make a trade, and if you were to write it down, your prediction would be that you were going to, it was going to make 7%. And it makes 12%, and you say, I knew it all along. And it's like, well, no, you didn't. But you've misremembered how great you thought that trade was. And so now you can't go back and look, because it would actually be nice to go in and say, I thought it was going to make 7%, but it actually made 12%. Was that just a tail event, and I had that included in my model, or did I not see risk that was involved, where I would like to see that risk because that might change how I might trade in the future? Or, by the way, maybe when I think about what was informing that trade, it actually won for reasons that I didn't even predict. Maybe I thought it was going to produce more widgets than they said, and it actually turned out that it got acquired by somebody else, which wasn't in my model, right? So I didn't know that was going to win at all in that case. But we sort of will retrofit and we'll think, oh no, I knew I had that in my model, that it was going to be, that it might be acquired, right? And so this is why I think that these processes are so incredibly important, is that you have to have some record of what are the beliefs that you have, what are the things that are informing your decision, what's the data that you're bringing to bear on that, how are you modeling that, what are the different options that you're considering, which could just be, by the way, I want to put a position on, but how big? That would be an option you might consider, right? And then you actually have to map out for any of those options, what are the possible outcomes? How likely do I think those are to occur? And obviously that's going to be what's going to allow you to see, so what's the upside down potential, what's the downside potential, what's the risk, in the decision. And then you can sort of compare options and say, okay, how well is this going to advance me toward my goals? And can you do some pretty skinny versions of this? To Mark's point, sure, assuming the more liquidity, the skinnier it can be, but you still need something, you still need something to refer back to, because otherwise you're not going to be able to close those learning loops. And if I'd say one thing that would improve your process would be to be able to not just make great decisions in the moment, but once the world unfolds as it does, right? Once the future becomes the present, to be able to say, oh, well, let me now go check. Because inherent, literally all that any decision is that you ever make in your whole life is a prediction of the future. That's what it is. So write down what that prediction is at the time, and then when the future actually happens, you can see how good of a predictor you were. And that's what's going to allow you to learn.
But this is how journals worked for me. So if I go back to my trading days, and in the early stages of my career, I started journals a couple of times. And when I say decision make journal, they were more just what I was feeling and thinking and what ideas I've got. And I started them a couple of times and then abandoned them. And then later in my career, I got more serious about them. And I would just put what my trade idea is, what I think the market's going to do, or what the drivers are.
Right.
And I was
that, which is that amazing.
Yeah, and I wasn't doing it every day. It wasn't something I did all the time. It was something I did part-time, a little bit like you said, you don't want it to cramp your style or get in the way. Then one day I decided there was a quiet time in the market, sometimes you're better off when it's quiet finding something else to do because you get into trouble by trying to do things you shouldn't. And and I started looking back over a journal, and I got really curious about an idea which I'd written down a few years earlier, and I was aware of what happened next. And I was aware that I'd made no notes in the days afterwards about this because I was aware that my prediction was pretty spot on, and I'd written down the trade that I wanted to put on. So I decided to just look at what happened, go back into my trading system, what action had I done, look at my blotter where I made my notes, what I was doing. And I noticed that I actually started tinkering with the trade when the market got close to it, trying to perfect it, trying to squeeze a bit more juice out of it. And it became a disaster, and I never got the trade on that I wanted. And then I thought, God, I wasn't even aware that I was doing that. I was completely blind to it. Like you said, memory creep, protecting your ego, all these things come in and just sort of paint over it. So I started looking forward for other examples of this, and they started appearing everywhere.
Yep.
And I wasn't even aware of it. It was almost like suddenly I'd had this video of the last few years of my trading, and it sucked. And it was like, and I was actually trading quite well generally at that time. I was making decent money, but I'm thinking, and to use the poker analogy, how much money have I actually left on the table here? Because what if I'm struggling? This could be the difference between keeping my head above water and really struggling.
Yeah, so that's such a good point. So I have to hop, sadly, but let me just close with this. I think that these types of processes are actually the most important for people who are experiencing success. Because when you're losing, you're losing. All your money's off the table. You better change something because you don't have any money left. When you're winning, it's so easy to just say, "I'm great." And the problem is that then starts to ossify. It starts to harden the models that you have and your opinion about your ability. And then if things start going poorly, then it's really easy for you to start to rationalize that and just say, "Oh, it's just bad luck," because obviously I've had so much success. But what I try to say to people who are really successful is, hey, what if I could tell you for 100% that you're leaving 50 bips on the table? Like, I get it. Like, you're earning, you're generating alpha. That's great. But what if I could tell you for sure that if I pulled the curtain back, you would see 50 bips lying on the table that you're walking away from because you don't have good process? Would you be horrified? And they'd be like, of course, that would be horrible. And I said, but that's the only thing that you can do is what you just said. It's like you were winning. Overall, you were doing great. But then you went back and looked and you said, oh my God, look at all these little places around the edges that I'm giving up. And if the market tightened, that would start to show through a lot more. And all of a sudden you would go from a winner to a loser because of these raggedy edges. And so we always want to be making sure that we've got clean edges, right? That we don't allow those raggedy edges to remain hidden because we think so well of ourselves. And we don't want to sit there and say, I'm an awesome trader. I don't actually want to go find out all the really stupid crap that I've done. But you do want to go find out the stupid crap that you've done. That's where all the money is.
It's where the value is.
So sadly, I have to leave. Though.
This has been such a great talk.
I know, it's been so fun.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but I have to go to my next thing. But this has been really lovely, and I've had such a lovely chat with you.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much. And just very quickly, where can people find out about you and your work and your book?
3 places. Annie at Annie Duke on Twitter. www.annieduke.com. That's my website, and then the Alliance for Decision Education, which is my nonprofit. All right, I'm gonna head out. This has been really wonderful. Thank you, guys.
It's been a pleasure, Annie.
Okay, thanks a lot. Bye bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to the Alpha Mind podcast today with myself, Stephen Goldstein, and my co-host Mark Randall. The Alpha Mind podcast is sponsored by the Society of Technical Analysts. You can find out more about the STA by going onto their website at sta-uk.org. There you can find details about all their services and how to become a member. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please feel free to go onto whichever service you use, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcast, or whatever, and leave a rating and, if possible, a review. This helps us to increase our audience size so more people can find out about the work we're doing and the great interviews we're having with our guests. You can also find out more about us by visiting the Alpha Mind website, alpha-mind.net. Also, please visit our blog page, the Alpha Mind blog, at alphamindblog.blogspot.com. You can also connect with us on social media at AlphaMind101, and also on LinkedIn. Both myself and Mark would be delighted to connect with you, or join the AlphaMind group, which has over 15,000 members. Finally, just to let you know a little bit about both mine and Mark's individual services, I work as a coach both to traders and investment professionals, but I also work more broadly in the industry as an executive coach with leaders and managers, and also with organisations working to help to develop teams and business culture. My colleague Mark also works as a coach and also offers his services as a consultant, where he works with human performance and leadership teams right across the industry. Finally, that just leaves me to say thank you for listening, and do tune in next time. Have a good week.